You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and federally certified veteran-owned small business. I'm your host, Robert Bain, along with our producer, Chris Spangle. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact us at chris@leadersandlegends.net. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister.
My name is Chris Creighton. I'm the Vice President of Innovation and Growth here at Marian University, and I'm also the Executive Director of the Fortune Institute. So as we prepared again, just everyone seems to be taking their seats, but also silence your cell phones, and if there's any need for the restroom, they're out to the right in the hallway. The Fortune Institute on Civic Leadership and Capitalism's mission is to form principled leaders in civics, business, and public service through scholarships, a minor in civic leadership and capitalism, and conversations like this Lugar Speaker Series, named in honor of Senator Richard G. Lugar. If you do know a high school senior that is interested in these topics, civics, capitalism, economics, I would encourage them to apply to Marian University and apply for the Fortune Scholarship. I'd like to recognize Holly Gastineau-Grimes, who is the academic director of the program. Really appreciative of her leadership, and thank our Fortune Scholars here tonight. They are the heart of this work, and we appreciate Holly and our students' leadership. Tonight's program begins with Father Rick Martignetti leading us in prayer, opening remarks from President Dan Elsner, and then the panel discussion between Governor Eric Holcomb and Senator Joe Donnelly, moderated by Robert Bain, the leader of the Leaders and Legends podcast. Please also, faculty and staff and students, join us tomorrow for Lugar Continued, a follow-up dialogue hosted by our scholarly learning communities in the Dining Commons faculty and staff reading room from 10 to 11:30. Quickly, I'd like to recognize a few distinguished guests tonight. Peruse the guest list. State Senator Cindy Carrasco is supposed to be here. Justice Mark Massa, Justice Justin McAdam, former Mayor Greg Ballard, former Congressman Luke Messer, and former State Senator Teresa Lubbers. I'm sure there's others that I have missed, but really appreciate you being here. Finally, just extend our deep gratitude to our lead donor, Russell Jock Fortune, and his late wife, Penny, whose generosity makes this program possible. Thank you for being here. If you especially like what you hear and see, please donate to the program at the QR code on the screen. And again, thank you for being here. Father Rick, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Always a great practice to begin everything with prayer. So I invite you to join me in praying right now. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord God, thank you for this evening. We ask you to bless it. Send your Holy Spirit to guide, to lead this discussion. Bless our thoughts, our words, our actions. Let this be a beautiful time tonight where we grow closer to one another and closer to you. Thank you for bringing these wonderful men to the stage tonight. Thank you for all the contributions they have made for the dignity of humanity, for the public good, and for promoting any values that come from heaven, family values, values of love. I ask you to strengthen these men to go forward and do even more for the glory of your kingdom and for the good of humanity. Help us all as we just learn a little bit more what we are called to in the political realm, in loving one another and serving one another. Let this be a time of good, healthy discussion and conversation and peace in our hearts. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you. What's he talking about?
I first want to thank Father Rick for that splendid introduction to the microphone this evening. Thank you, Father Rick, for the prayer. Thank you all for being here. We very much appreciate your presence. I hope you can hear well. Marian University is a Catholic university very much like to live out a central mission that we would be a place where we would, and I educate students for a private good to earn a better living and have opportunity, but that we as an institution and our graduates would be a heavy influence, a powerful influence on the culture. We take that very serious as a charge. We also take very serious as a charge that we would be home to a lively dialogue between faith and reason and prudential judgments on political issues of the day and different points of view, a place where lively dialogue is animated by a Christian ethos that while we have differences, no human person ever loses their dignity. They have value as a human person. Their opinions may differ. And how do you have that lively dialogue? And reading the signs of the times, which is another charge of our institution, we see a need for more emphasis on this in higher education, especially at a university like this. And we formulated a concept of an idea where we really started back with Richard Lugar, where we would have speakers and explore issues. And then lately we've been wanting to do much more, to invite scholars to the university to study free enterprise and what a democratic republic should be and how we share ideas and grow, participate, and make it even stronger in the future. As I explored that concept with various people, we were fortunate, Jock Fortune and his late wife, Penny, of course, would be very much for this as she was here, said, we should work together to invest and do more of that, and Marian University would be a great place to do it. So I want to publicly thank you, Jock, Chris Creighton. I want to thank you for your leadership. Dr. Holly Gastineau-Grimes is here somewhere. Thank you for your academic leadership. We're going to bring speakers, academic programs, events, and projects, bring people together to live out that idea that we have, that higher education should be a positive force on the culture, that we're home to a lively, a respectful dialogue between people of different faiths, faith and reason, and different judgments about the issues of the day. And in doing that, we'll be witness to our faith and strong gospel values, which we are called to be as a great Catholic university in this great American city. Tonight we have a very special program because of the stature of our speakers. We're very, very proud, and I'll introduce them. Governor Holcomb, who just retired as governor not long ago. Come on, Governor Eric Holcomb. Two-term governor, and one of these politicians at the end was more popular than you were in the beginning, and that's always a good sign, isn't it, Governor? And governor now, and as a matter of fact, he flew back early from his teaching assignment at Harvard University. He weighed the two institutions and their importance in his life, and he got back as fast as he could. And he even talked to the pilot. He said, I have a gig tonight. And he was telling me backstage. And if he looks particularly bright, it's because he also possesses an honorary doctoral degree from Marian University. And that's why he gave a commencement speech here. And I see Greg and Winnie Ballard. They both have doctoral degrees from Marian University if they look particularly bright. So we're pleased to have you. And then I'm also pleased to introduce another distinguished U.S. Senator, former ambassador to the Vatican. Buddy. See, that's how Democrats and Republicans are supposed to act, right there. We wanted to witness and put that on display for you. But Ambassador Donnelly is a very distinguished and accomplished leader, and he didn't have to fly, drove south from his teaching assignment at the University of Notre Dame. We refer to as Marian North here. But we're pleased to have you, Marian North, Marian South. I hope this is a even more pleasurable experience.
Thank you.
We're very happy. And then lastly, I want to introduce a dear friend of Marian, Robert Vane, is going to be the moderator of our discussion. Robert, Are you playing cards back there, or would you like to come forward? Yeah, there we go. And Robert, Robert's a consultant, marketing communication, and been a good friend of Marian and helps on many projects. Thank you again all for being here. Thank you, Mr. Fortune, for your support. And let's get this started. Thank you very much.
Have we all done a mic test so we can be heard? Can you hear us all out there, amplified and ready to go? President Elsner has made a horrible mistake. He has given an East Sider a microphone, along with my fellow East Sider, Teresa Lovers, I should say. It's a chance here to say thank you to a few people. There's a lot of folks, just very quickly, in this audience who have helped me in my career, and I can't name them all, but a couple of them I want to make sure that I mention. One is Toby McClamrock, who's here, who's one of the most fabulous men I've ever met. And another person who's here who has to be recognized only for his selfless public service is Earl the Pearl. Earl Good. Thank you so much for being here. We're here because what these two men represent is, in a lot of ways, our past, but it could be our future. There's one other person in this room who represents the exact same thing. And there's no way in heck I am going to get up on the stage and not acknowledge him. And that is my former boss, Greg Ballard. He is the best. And finally, there we go. It is National Daughters Day. So Anna Vane, I love you very much. I'm very proud of you. Andrew, you too. How did we get so lucky as Hoosiers to have not only these men, let's name a few more. Andy Jacobs, Richard Lugar, first person I ever worked for, because I was hired by Devin Anderson, hired being Dan Coates, Lee Hamilton, all these great men and women, Susan Brooks, that come out of the Hoosier State. We'll start with Ambassador Donnelly. You've traveled the world, officially and unofficially. What makes Hoosiers different than all the other folks you've met?
Probably the main quality is just trying to get things done in a common sense way. I had the privilege of working with Governor Holcomb, Eric, for a number of years. And those conversations, I don't think ever touched on politics. It was, how can we fix this? How can we fix that? And the understanding almost inherent in the state, which is our job was to make the lives of everybody a little bit better. That next year, our state can be a little bit stronger. And if you didn't, I always laughed. I said, if I didn't, I knew Richard Lugar was looking at me. And he and Birch Bayh and so many others set a standard that I always felt, I served in the same seat as Senator Lugar, I always felt an obligation to live up to what he would expect. And I think that's the Hoosier way.
Governor?
Yeah, I think it's a healthy balance of high standards, high expectations. Maybe people outside of the state of Indiana think it's something in the water. We probably ought to thank our ancestors, our parents, for the way we were raised. But Hoosiers just have this wonderful balance about them, being humble and hungry, and always seeking to get the job done, and willing, I think, to, at least our experience has been, willing to work across aisles, across terrain, across boundaries to get the job done. And I think having that rich history to draw upon brings it to the present and then gives me a hopeful outlook for the future as well.
Senator Donnelly, you worked in Washington, D.C. for 2006 through 2018. That's correct, so 12 years. Are our perceptions of Washington, D.C., from Indiana, our perceptions of the city and how it works, fair or unfair? Because they're not great.
No, I understand that. I can give you the perspective from when I was there, which is your word was your bond. If you said something, you kept your word. If you agreed you'd do it, then you did it. The goal was to work together to try to make life a little bit better. Now, do we agree on every issue? No, we don't. But how do we make it so that at the end of the day, life is a little bit better? And so during those years, I laughed. I said, who knew we were in a golden age during that time? I was like, oh, you go home and beat up every day. And it's like, oh, that was a golden age. I'm like, I didn't know it at the time. But some of my closest friends were the Republicans because they had the same goals and they had the same drive to make America stronger. I remember working on Iraq and Afghanistan. And, you know, it was one thing, which was, how can we keep our young men and women safe? How can we leave behind a stable situation? How can we do this together? I met with President Bush on this, President Obama, and those kind of things, you remember that there's a common goal because we have this incredible sacred obligation from our voters, from our citizens, who looked at us and said, our son, our daughter is serving over there. Keep watch. And so I think that was, during those years, I think it's somewhat different now. But back then, and it's not that long ago, if you gave your word, you're expected to keep it.
And back, you know, just if I could piggyback on that, back to how we were raised, what are the expectations when you're representing constituents or citizens back home? I think this isn't going to sound, I mean what I'm about to say. I think we need to disagree more, but how we disagree. Like our founders and framers disagreed vehemently, but they understood that the word was their bond, and when they were in the chamber, they were there to negotiate. They were there to compromise at times. We wouldn't be sitting here on this stage had they not had serious disagreements with one another, but understood that that was the place to do it. And unfortunately, there are some outside influences that now get us to where we are in these cocoons and we talk to like-minded individuals about the people we don't like. We don't talk to them about the differing opinions anymore, reaching across the aisle. So what stokes me and what gets me fired up is being on college campuses where the students are willing, are doing, showing us that they can. They want to have a college Republican president and a college Democrat president come together and talk about the issues of the day. And so in this odd way, it's kind of flipped the script. And some of the next generation of leaders are showing us that you don't have to resort to the ultimate, fed by one channel.
Do you have another one of those?
I'm feeling lonely without my microphone. I'm feeling you don't actually want to listen to me, sir.
It's called the deep state. I'm sure you've heard of it.
I've been a victim for a long time.
I'll tell this quick story while they are getting Senator microphone.
I think mine's working at the moment.
I'll leave yours in. When he ran for Congress in the first time in 2006, I was communications director at the Indiana Republican Party. And I used to do radio interviews talking about what a terrible thing it would be if Joe Donnelly was elected congressman over Chris Chicola. And the person who was sitting in the office next to me, cheering me on, was Eric Holcomb.
Another quick story from that, and I just found this out a few weeks ago. An attorney came up to me in Washington. He said, I feel bad, but I want to tell you a story. I'm like, oh, this is going to go well. And he goes, in 2006, the weekend before the election, we looked like we weren't going to beat you, and you were going to beat the incumbent. And so we all figured, what can we do? He said, so they sent me out to the Notre Dame parking lots for the Notre Dame-Michigan game, and I wore a Joe Donnelly for Congress hat and a Michigan sweatshirt. And I said,
nasty.
that is really low.
Hanscom, were you working for him at the time? Did you not? You mentioned colleges, obviously, which makes this event even more timely, even though it may always be timely, is the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I don't know if you knew him. Maybe you didn't. No. But for those who think that's as bad as it's going to get, and we're turning a corner, and it can't get worse than this, how do we lower the temperature in a way that keeps the discourse alive, as Governor Holcomb said, but staying true to values? Senator Donnelly, you are known as a rock-ribbed, proud Democrat, but...
It was a horrible event. And people get in their silos, and the only information they get is something that supports what they believe. We need to talk to each other. We need to respect one another. We have seen so many awful things. We saw the legislator in Minnesota who was killed. We saw those young children in church in Minnesota killed. And there's like a loss of basic humanity. And what we need to know or realize is everybody, they don't have to agree with you, but you have a God-given responsibility to respect one another and look out for one another. And so much of what you see, I think, on the internet and in so many places, it just reinforces really bad ideas. And so it's like talk to one another, spend time with one another, begin to understand the humanity of one another. Maybe we can change this a little bit. Charlie Kirk had a wife and I think 2 little children. Nobody should lose their dad at like 2 or 3 years old, especially. It is just awful. And nobody should lose their mom, who was serving in the legislature trying to make Minnesota a better place. We can't keep doing this.
You, my friend Eric Holcomb, is a huge history buff. And I'm wearing my Abraham Lincoln tie.
I saw that.
Gifted to me by P.E. McAllister, the best
giant
man of all time. Abraham Lincoln appealed to the better angels of our nature.
Yeah.
How do we appeal to the better angels of our nature?
Well, I think back to we have to model the conduct of which we seek and encourage others. This investment by the Fortune family goes a long way. It epitomizes that. And there are other examples around the country. But with that alternative comes a lot of responsibility. And that's why I go back to why I'm so hopeful around students, because they're willing to step up. And it's easy to say, we're not living in unprecedented times. We've been through the 60s. We've been through a civil war where it was, family against family. We've been through 2 world wars. We've been at each other's throats time and time again. At our founding, Hamilton...
Burr shot Hamilton.
In a duel, a violent duel. But it's not enough to say this is not unprecedented. We are at a point where, because of technology, which Joe was just talking about, and how we kind of self-select our silos that we're going to feel comfortable in, we have to have examples, operating examples in organizations and associations and clubs on campus and others that show that there is a better way.
What types of experiences should young people, specifically college students, be seeking to establish themselves as a civic leader in their career or their free time? When did you get started in politics at Hanover?
I think the most political job I've had a couple political jobs that you wouldn't think. I worked in a NATO headquarters in Europe with 16 nations, and if you don't think that was political, with a Spanish admiral arguing with a Portuguese admiral about who owned what half of the world when and who was wronged. if you don't think a college fraternity president is political, which I did 2 years of, try it. I probably, in looking back, it was never, I think public service was maybe in my DNA, wasn't in my parents weren't specifically, involved in political events or government affairs, but very knowledgeable, very attuned to what was going on around the world, had a lot of discussions around the table about what was going on. In high school, I got involved, but it wasn't something I saw. It was a teacher that said, you need to run for senior class president, which did. So one kind of experience led to the next, led to the next, led to the next. I think the only thing, and others encouraged that, the only thing that I probably set out to do on my own was joining the Navy. And that reinforced a lot of the public service skill sets and mindset that this is about the public, not about you. It's about what he said at the very outset, like, who are we here for?
Right.
What is our mission in this all? And so I would just say to students that you don't have to have the whole playbook in your hand right now, but cherish those experiences as they unfold one by one, and they will lead you on a pathway to where your personality is aligned with your passion, hopefully.
I think it's being involved in your community, Little League coach, helping with food drives. I'll tell you 2 quick stories. One was, the way I wound up running for Congress was, I got a call when my kids were in, believe it or not, Marian High School in Mishawaka, Indiana. And they said, you've been elected to the school board. And I said, that can't be. I'm not a candidate for the school board. And they said, well, so-and-so resigned. We got together and we elected you. And I said, well, I can't do it. I'm sorry. And they said, well, then you'll have to personally visit the bishop and tell him no. I said, when is the first meeting? And so from that, you expand into so many other places. And in 2004, folks were worried about Iraq and Afghanistan, and they came and asked me to run for Congress. I had a young intern who worked for me when I was in Congress. His name was Pete Buttigieg. Pete's from South Bend. He came into the office, and it was a summer day, I'll never forget, and he said, hey. I said, hey, it's nice to see you again. I had seen him once or twice before. He said, I really, really want to help with the campaign. I said, that's great. You don't want to get paid, do you? He said, no. And I said, well, there's a whole lot of things you can do. He said, well, I just got back from England. I was a Rhodes Scholar. And I thought I could work on foreign policy for you. Looked. And I said, well, first, in Indiana, a Rhodes Scholar is spelled R-O-A-D-S. And we don't get to do foreign policy unless we win. And so, therefore, if you want to help this weekend, you're working at 3 parades. And he dove right in. And everybody got to know him. Everybody got to work with him. He then ran for state treasurer, lost but made friends all around the state, ran for mayor of South Bend and won. And so it's being engaged. It's doing stuff. People will see you have a talent. People will see you have an interest. And almost every time, as I'm sure in your headquarters the same way, it's like, hey, why don't you try this next? Why don't you try this next? And so the opportunities are endless.
I was thinking about what you said and how, all of us who start out in politics, we want to talk about foreign policy or the Laffer curve or something that has nothing to do with winning. Right. I don't know that I've met anyone who has had more political jobs than Eric Holcomb. Which one did you enjoy the most?
I can tell you which one I enjoy the least.
Which one did you enjoy the least?
Maybe I shouldn't. I have been a happy warrior throughout it all. I hope my friends, those closest to me, would say that. I've signed up for it, like I've run for it or agreed to it, so I'm not a complainer. And I think along the way we've done a lot of good. I'm obviously biased, but we set out with a purpose. and those policies fold into that agenda. And so I've been proud of the people that I've associated with over the years on both sides of the aisle to get stuff done. And it goes back, ultimately it goes back to that. It goes back to casting your vision, and it goes back to building the team that can build the plan, that can execute on and implement the steps of the plan. Very goal-oriented, realizing that mission, and hopefully that's going to have a ripple effect or an impact on others being able to realize, not just rhetorically, but realize the American dream.
Who would you say, 2 or 3 people you would consider mentors? We know a couple of them, but I'm sure there's others. People who your life changed after you met X.
I would say Rear Admiral Tyndall, who you wouldn't know. I would say some coaches along the way who I thought were tyrants at the time, but they spoke the truth and they had high expectations and standards. And I would say certainly for those who know me in the political arena, Dan Coates, Mitch Daniels, Mike Pence. I have been very fortunate. Even a congressman, when I moved back to America, when I got out of the Navy, went to work for a congressman, his focus and convictions were all about the Constitution. And he had the courage of few I've seen. And I respected that. Maybe didn't agree 100% with him on issues, but I have come to really respect people who are, when they're convicted and willing to share their opinion and learn from others and disagreeing in a better way. That's who I have a lot of respect for, and that's who I've tried to learn from. But in the political world, I would say the people that had the most impact on me would be Mitch Daniels and Dan Coates.
I would say, my dad, my mom died when I was young, so my dad raised 5 kids. Left in the dark for work, came home in the dark for work. And somehow it worked. Father Hesburgh, who was the president of Notre Dame when I was there. Father Hesburgh, before I started my first day in Congress, I knew him, took me aside, we grabbed like some lunch or something, and he said, when you're there, here's the deal. He said, this is what I've done as president. I know this is what President Elsner does as well. He said, I don't do the easy thing. I try to do the right thing. And so when you see a vote coming, when you see something coming along, he goes, keep that in mind. Because there'll be a lot of people telling you, well, this will be easy if you do this or if you do that. And he goes, it never works. It just never works. And then politically, Joe Kernan from my hometown of South Bend, Vietnam prisoner of war, extraordinarily good person. And John McCain, who I served in the Senate with, who was a wonderfully close friend, I was with him at a restaurant one time in Israel, and he never would talk about it. But when he was in a Vietnamese prison camp, he was beaten so badly that we're there having dinner, and we're getting ready to leave, and his assistant, his aide, comes up, and he puts his head down, and she combs his hair because he couldn't lift his arms up above that point. And he was a fireball. One day you're like, God, he hates me. And the next day he's like, when are we going to have the beer? But his goal was always this country that he loved so much. And I just want to say one thing, point of personal privilege. I'm very, very fortunate. Any success I had was caused by some people here. A lot of my teammates from the Senate office and House office are here. So thank you. You gave me this chance, and I sure appreciate it.
I think something that Joe said midway through about doing the right thing, it sounds to be like a throwaway line sometimes when you hear it out in public, but that's very important. Yeah. And you mentioned, and I was looking, and right before you acknowledged your team, I see Joe Herons, and I see Earl, and I see Michael Bryan, and the two Tylers, Emily, and folks. I see Brian McGrath now, yes. I think they would say, if Earl heard me say this once, he heard me say it 100 times, we're just going to do the right thing. Let the chips fall where they may. By the way, and because there's high school students here and college students here, not to sound negative, but at times you may think you may lose a friend over doing the right thing. When it gets really hot in the kitchen and you've been informed to the extent that you think that you and only you can make the decision and you're comfortable with it, others won't always agree with you. And you have to be able to live with that, knowing that your conscience is clear and you're doing the right thing. And I think it's very liberating when you get to a point where you accept that and you're going to go to bed sleeping good that night, even though you made a weighty decision that's going to affect a lot of other people because of the role that you have.
And you say to yourself, this is what they hired us to do. And so this, and I know this is the right thing to do. For instance, the Affordable Care Act vote. They all said, you are going, check your office real close because you will never see it next year. But I knew that it would provide health care for 20 million more people. And so I said, my job is to explain that. I don't know if I can explain it to enough people by election day, but my job isn't to take the easy way out. It's to do the right thing. And then a few years later, a lady came up to me, and she had triplets. And they were all tied around her legs and everything and running around. And she said, what do you think of my boys? I said, they are a handful. And she said, they were born at 6 months. 3 months in the neonatal intensive care unit. Her bill when she left the hospital was $5 million. She's from South Bend. She probably didn't have like $5 million. And she said, we still have everything. The bills got taken care of because of the Affordable Care Act. She goes, so thanks for the vote. And you look and you go, there you go.
I'm proud to say, I voted for both of you.
I'm glad to hear that.
I didn't vote for you in the one you needed. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
And I've been in Republican politics for a long time, just like the governor. But these days, as I get older, I tell people the R behind my name stands for retirement. How important is it for folks like you who are seen, branded, and lauded as reasonable, willing to listen? How important is it for you to keep doing what you're doing tonight?
I think it's real important because you have to show folks there's an alternative. You know, I was in, because I was going to be here tonight, I came down from South Bend yesterday afternoon, and I was at the Shelbyville Democrats dinner last night. And what I talked to them about was, we're in this together to make Indiana a better place. And what we talked about was clean water, good schools, good jobs. It wasn't like this one's bad here, this one's bad there. And so I think for us, it's our job to try to show, listen, there's an alternative to a lot of what you see on television. And that alternative works pretty good. I used to always say to, you know, like the more liberal Democrats who would go crazy sometimes on me, tell them, look, do you want 70% of something or 100% of nothing? And that's, you know, we have to realize we're in this together. And you're usually not going to get everything you want, but at the end of the day, we can have a stronger, better America that looks out for one another.
Huge opportunity because so many people are dropping out, tuning out, disengaging. For those who choose to engage, can have a profound difference. And one reason why I will continue to look for ways to stay engaged. It may not be with that capital R by my name. Who knows? But I will find ways to make sure that what Joe just said, that we're in this to pursue progress, not some personal perception of perfection. You don't get, I'll tell a story, and I've told this to some people in the room, in the theater. I was in an NGA, National Governors Association meeting with the executive committee, Republicans and Democrat governors. And Sununu looks at me after about 20 minutes, and he goes, clearly, Holcomb, you got something you want to say. And I'd just been listening. This was in a February meeting, so the Democrat governors have their meetings, and then the Republican governors have their meetings, and then we all get together. And I said, look, we've been out here for about 4 days, and we've been talking about the same things. And at some point, I'm willing to go stand in Times Square in New York City with Kathy Hochul, this Democrat from an East Coast blue state. I'm from a red state in the Midwest. I will stand in Times Square with Kathy Hochul and say, I agree on 6 out of 10 issues when it comes to immigration or energy or fill in the blank. We have so much more that we agree on than we disagree on. It's because we get wrapped around that axle, and when I say we, I mean there are coalitions out there that are formed. And so to be against, we have to be willing to stand up and express what we're for and do it eloquently and articulate what's at stake for sure, but do it by example.
Senator Donnelly mentioned something that was next on my list. Those of us who've worked in politics, I don't know anyone who would dispute this sentence, so I'll say it, but I want to ask for your comments. The feuds, the temperature within a particular party can be, and usually is, much worse than between parties. Senator Donnelly, you mentioned you're a relatively conservative Democrat in a red state, but there are certain expectations. Governor Holcomb, besides being chairman of the Indiana Republican Party, I think you headed coalitions in 2004 for candidate Mitch Daniels. Plus, you have to deal with folks who maybe are a little more conservative than you. How do you, I mean, it's one thing when it's coming from the other side, right? But the fire in the rear is very difficult and becomes personal quickly. Both of you, but Senator Donnelly first. How did you deal with that?
Well, you'll all believe this, and this is true. So in the United States Senate, there are some states that have 2 senators from the same party. Some states have 2 senators from different parties. The states where the senators are from different parties, those senators always get along great. When they're the same party, they spend all their time bad-mouthing each other. And so I remember, and my dear friend Peter Hanscom, who helped put the tour together, we did a 40-city bus tour during the last Senate campaign around Indiana. And the most miserable, unpleasant experience.
Bloomington?
You said it, I did not say that. But I will tell you when I disagree with you. I got on the bus, I was like, oh my gosh, what just happened? Right? And of course, that's the place where I got the highest percentage of the vote in any county. And I'm like, we have to give people some space to try to do the right thing. And I remember that 70-100 thing because I said it at that event. And I said, do you want 70%? I said, we're in Indiana. Do you want 70% of something or you're going to get 100% of nothing? They said, we want 100% of everything. And I said, I thought you go to college down here. But, you live in, you roll with it. I mean, there's nothing you can do. I had an opponent in a primary who that was their very platform was, he's too conservative, he's this, he's that. We need a true progressive. This is in South Bend. And in the primary, I got 84% of the vote because I was myself. And so you stick to your guns.
Yeah, I think you don't lose yourself in what you do. And it helps to have the skin of a rhinoceros when you're going through these campaigns. But again, staying true to yourself. What is your North Star? Why are you there? What is your plan? Being able to articulate that
and staying focused, being disciplined, not to be pulled off track. And I would always say chasing squirrels. You're there for a reason, and it's your job to dig deep and grind it out when you're getting attacked from the left or the right or anywhere.
Ambassador Donnelly, do we need more people like Eric Holcomb in the Democratic Party and Governor Holcomb? Do we need more people like Joe Donnelly in the Republican Party?
Yeah, you do it. You know, the American dream is so that the next generation, your kids can have a better life than you, and that their kids can have a better life than them. And that's what you try to shoot for in the job is, how do I make it so that Indiana's a little stronger, a little better, America's a little stronger, a little better? And then you put yourself out before the voters and you do the best you can. And if it doesn't work out in the election, you can at least walk away with your head held high. But it's about, don't waste your time. One thing I wanted to mention is that concerns me so much is I remember, and I have enormous respect for him, President Obama. And it was on the Affordable Care Act. There's some things he wanted that I didn't think made much sense for Indiana. And he told me exactly what he thought of what I was doing.
And he had won Indiana in 2008, the first Democrat to win since Johnson in 1964.
He had. And he reminded me of that. But I told him, I said, you know, Mr. President, I have enormous respect for you, but I don't work for you. I work for the people of Indiana. I work with you. And we try to get something done properly and correctly. And I worry about folks in office who are doing what, who are not doing, who think they're working for the next person who's the political office holder, who are afraid to make decisions because they might get primaried, who are afraid to make decisions because this one might get mad at me. You don't go there to worry about that. And it's inevitable it's going to happen, and you take your lumps. But I think one of the most important things you can always remember in office is who you work for. Who you work for. Like I always said, I work with President Bush. I work with President Trump. I work with President Obama. I work for the people of Indiana.
Yeah, I think to answer your question directly, yes, we need both. But I would focus in on the trait of not sacrificing your principles, but working to achieve something. History will treat those kindly. That is where legacies come in. That's how you're remembered as a person. Why we're all here. Why we're all hopefully looking after our neighbors. And if it's one and done because of some vote, then so be it.
That's life.
That's life. And your head's up high. And you move on to the next challenge, hopefully with a sunny disposition. There is more to this than a vote or an office or a title. It's the what that is so important. And I think if both parties had a healthy dose and reminders of that, we'd all be better off as a nation.
Real quick, I just want to tell everybody about a lesson I'll never forget. So I had just been elected to Congress. I'd been to Washington 3 times in my life, so I was no expert. And I got a call from Senator Lugar. And he said, why don't we have breakfast? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to have breakfast with Senator Lugar. Maybe I'll get his autograph while I'm there, you know? So he said, listen, I want you to know something. He said, we have young men and women at risk in Iraq and in Afghanistan. It's really dangerous there right now. And any questions you may have to ask me about this, and he said, or anything else. He said, whatever you say to me stays between you and me. Whatever I say to you stays between you and me. But we got to get these kids home safe, and we got to work together to do it. And I just thought, there's your example.
Well, thank you for doing so, because my son Joshua was doing his second tour in Afghanistan as a combat infantryman.
Please tell him. Thank you, Joshua.
There's a lot of amazing people in this room who've done incredible work through their careers, had great jobs and positions of influence. Nobody has had a cooler job than ambassador to the Holy See. What did you think when you were offered that job, and how much did you enjoy it? And, oh, by the way, because I know this because you came on my podcast, how many Americans asked you to ask the Pope to marry them?
True story. They used to call it the Indiana Embassy to the Vatican. And my assistant came in with this smirk on her face and said, "So I got a call." I said, "Oh." She goes, "Yeah, he's from Elkhart, Indiana." She goes, "Of course he is." And she goes, "He's in Germany with his wife, and he would like the Pope to renew their wedding vows on Wednesday at 4:30. She goes, "What would you like me to tell him?" I said, "Tell him 4:30 is taken, but 6 p.m. will work." It was an amazing, to represent your country it takes your breath away. And to do it in a place where folks will go, "What do you think about this church issue or that church issue?" I said, "I don't do church issues. I do our government and their government." And we work together on a lot of USAID programs trying to provide food around the world. We work together to try to bring Ukrainian children home who had been taken by the Russians, to try to help with the situation in Gaza. And so it was an amazing experience. And then the other part about it is every other country in the world looked to us for leadership. And you knew that when you were in the Navy, you'd see it, that the other ambassadors would come up and go, "What are you going to do on this? How are you going to handle this?" And that's how America's viewed around the world. Is they look and they go, "We want you next to us. We want you to do this together." And my team will believe this story because I was infamous when the lights would go out, I'd duck out a side door or something. So I had just gotten into town. It was like the first or second night. And there was a sacred music concert, which is, I kind of like Bruce Springsteen, but there was a sacred music concert in this big church. And they said, "You have to go." And there was another thing, like 45 minutes into it. And they said, "Then you got to go to that." So I'm with my wife, and I said, "I got a plan. We're going to sit in the back row of this big church. That way we check the box that we attended. The lights will go out we go. And we're on our way to the next
Is there a name for that?
Yeah, it's doing a Holcomb." No, I don't. And so we sit down, and this is amazing, and I think we got this wired. And here comes the ambassador of the country that's holding this sacred music concert. And she comes back and she said, "You must come up front." And I said, "No, I don't want to be rude. I don't want to interfere." And she goes, "You are the American ambassador. I cannot have the American ambassador sitting in the back. The American ambassador sits next to me." My wife looks, she goes, "Oh, I'm really enjoying this." But
She said the ambassador sits next, like not her.
But that love of the Italian people for our country, of the people at the Vatican for our country, that's what really inspires you and makes you so proud.
People look to the governor in times of grief, in times of celebration. Doesn't really matter. You're expected to be there, weigh in, convey our thoughts. You were governor from 2017 to 2025. In that time, the city, this university, and the state suffered some losses. I've wrote a few of them down here. Of course, P.E. McAllister, Jerry Simler, Richard Lugar, Birch By, Jim Morris, and not to mention numerous firemen, policemen, George Rapp, that's right. How do you, as a leader, how do you speak or try to speak for all Hoosiers in such a perilous time?
Well, you're ticked off a list of giants who, while we obviously mourn their loss, and they leave a ginormous hole in maybe more than our hearts, but in what they were contributing. But they also left, I think, a legacy and a how to do it the right way that dwarfs and the reason why we celebrate the life that they lived and shared, most importantly, with us and our friends and neighbors. And so every person you ticked off there, when I had the opportunity to spend any time, I cherished it. It was like getting a degree. Whether it was, and probably the same true for you, Joe, is when you would spend time with these giants, usually it wasn't the response that they would give you. If I went to Jim Morris, which I did on occasion, and maybe I was a little upset about something or frustrated, he would always say, Eric, it's going to be okay. Like, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And it would. It was just these gentle, friendly reminders that you got a lot of people around you, that there's a lot of love and support and folks willing to oar together to get there. And it may be shallow, rocky water at times, COVID being one of them, protest in the streets being one of them. But together, you use the word inspiration. And I always found in the toughest of times, no matter if you were in a small, tiny one-dot town or a big city, usually the citizens were immediately ahead of what the state was going to do. And it could be domestic or international affairs, quite frankly. I mean, when I think about Ukraine or Afghanistan, the refugees that came here when we did a safe haven, there were churches and universities and citizens with expressions of help before we were deployed as a state, trying to help a friend in need, indeed, action. And so I think being tethered to or very connected to the citizens and their heartbeat is very instructional and paramount to whether you're successful or not.
If I could just say,
ask you this
if I
question.
could just say one
Go right
thing,
ahead.
and it ties into what Eric just said. And you had asked about Washington earlier. And what always helped with decision making was Washington, but you'd come home. And then you'd meet with folks at home. And that would clear your head. And then you'd go, this is what makes sense.
Politicians, elected public officials, protest. I'm not guided by polls. I'm not influenced by social media. I don't pay attention to the chatter out there. But what I've never heard an elected official, especially at the level at which you both served, I've never heard one say, faith plays no role in how I serve. How did faith play a role in how you served? Senator Donnelly first, please.
Well, it was always a part of my life. And, before some really tough stuff, I'll never forget the morning of the Affordable Care Act vote. It was on a Sunday night. And right across from the Senate is St. Joseph's Church. And I was at Mass there. And I just said, look, help me to do the right thing. Just keep an eye out for me today. It is that the faith you have is part of who you are, and it's a belief that I don't know everything, but boy, with faith I can accomplish anything.
Yeah, I think it was my North Star. I maybe didn't wear it on my sleeve. Throughout life, you have different experiences where you're moved, and I'll share one today. I have been moved, goosebumps, moved. The experience stayed with me days, years later on a few occasions. And as a history buff, you'd probably relate to a few of them. If you walk the Gettysburg battlefield in the morning with the fog, it is moving. If you walk on the floor of Independence Hall where our founders walked, it is moving. If you're fortunate enough to go to the sermon where the Sermon on the Mount was delivered at the Sea of Galilee and consider what was shared, what was preached, and try to live a life that is aligned with those instructions, those very basic, the Beatitudes, that will, certainly in my experience, frame it all for you. Like, at the very essence, what are we here for? And I feel very comfortable sharing that, being here at Marian, because it proves that in my faith, the Bible is what I believe to be the original rule book, right? Like the self-help book. And it proves that you can live a life that is aligned with those teachings, the scriptures, and still, obviously, God ordained 3 institutions, right? So government being one of them. So these are not inconsistent or at odds, or even there doesn't have to be tension amongst the 3. And that was very comforting to me, even though you go through some very challenging, dark times, to know where you are truly grounded and pointed will get you through those tough times.
We have just a few minutes left, and I don't know who from Marian can give me the high sign. I don't have my reading glasses on, so I can't read my watch. So let me know when we have 10 minutes left, Chris, or you can go forever if you like. One of the features of the Fortune Scholars Program is that these Marian students will be majoring in a variety of areas: business, engineering, nursing, teaching, etc. What advice would you give students in balancing their careers in those fields with their civic involvement and engagement? Ambassador?
I think that the very pursuit makes our community better. That you have folks in nursing, you have folks in education, you have folks in various fields who, the ability to make your community a better place, you can touch it in so many ways. With working at a soup kitchen, with helping provide nursing care, helping provide with education. And so to all of them, I just say, look, and I think back to something I mentioned once or twice before. I think back to Warren Buffett. And Warren Buffett, who's obviously been extraordinarily successful, was asked, if you could be born at any time, when would you be born? And everybody thought he'd say, well, when I was, because look at what I was able to do. And he said, I want to be born now, because there's so much more to accomplish and so many things to be done. And we met the Fortune Scholars, just unbelievably wonderful young people. And I hope they know that the view ahead of them, there's like so many more things than we ever dreamed of. And anything they do that helps make our country a better place is pulling with the right oar.
Yeah, I would say to them, we want you, we need you, and I beg you to stay in Indiana and do whatever you do next. And to have a healthy balance between the two, and they will complement one another. I would also say in this world in which we can have everything come right to us, right on the screen, right in front of our face, to be very discerning and selective about what you say yes to. You can overcommit really quickly these days. And the quality of your experience at times will come down to what you commit your time and treasure and ultimately your talent to. So I would say get very involved, but don't spread yourself too thin.
See this in this question here, you led me right to it. Like a great person who's just politically minded and great at PR, how do you convince someone to stay? A lot of folks are down on Indiana for reasons that maybe we can agree or disagree, it doesn't matter, but how do we compete with Florida? How do we compete with the states that have other things to offer than just Hoosier hospitality? How do you keep kids here?
Every state has pluses and minuses. How you keep people here, I saw something and it said, the key to happiness is friendship and family. It's not money, it's not being on a surfboard in Florida every day. It's friendship and family. And if you give them the chance to have success, and I think that's what Eric and I always used to think about was, how can we help create more jobs, more opportunities so they stay? How can we make it so that they can afford a house? All of those kind of things, that we work on that every day. Look, Indiana, I've seen a lot of the world, and this is where I live. I love it here because my friends are here, my family is here, the people I care about are here. And my friends and my neighbors are nice, and our towns are nice. I've been to a lot of cities, big cities. Best big city in the world is Indianapolis, Indiana. We have so much here, so many things here. We have an undefeated football team. I used to say that in South Bend, but not tonight. But it is what you make of it. And you can always duck down to Florida for a month in January or February. But when you come home, it's like, I'm home. And so I think that's the key is friendship, family. And if you have a dream here in Indiana, you can make it come true.
When I was in the Army, I was just in New Mexico, so coming back to Indiana was kind of...
Back to the Army. You had to get that in there, didn't you?
You want to talk
about an hour.
You want to talk about the Marines with Ballard in the audience?
Oh, God.
We'll be here all night.
Oh, yeah. They did the real work. We just took them there.
That sound about right, Colonel Ballard? You're in Europe when you separated from the Navy, correct?
Yeah.
You could have gone anywhere, much like Senator Donnelly could have gone anywhere after Italy. You came back here. How do we keep people here?
By having a deliberate plan in place. Obviously, here at Marian, you do more than a yeoman's job. You created a model in creating these pathways for students when they're in class that they can go into the industry, get experience while they're here. The companies are camped out on campus, and so there's that pathway that's already created, and it makes it a whole lot easier to stay when you have the confidence of a job, right, or a career or a pathway ahead. And after all, it's going to be lifelong learning anyway, and so it's incumbent upon us to make sure that, as Marian has done, that education and training is accessible and affordable so that dignity that comes with a job is real, and again, not rhetorical. And then I would just say, and I'm probably going over time here, but I would just say we used to outcompete and beat those states you named all the time. And, Greg Ballard, your cup overfloweth with just sports events. Think about all the different events I used to hear from these states like Florida and Texas and Tennessee that threw big events, and they'd say, how do you have the NBA All-Star Game, the WNBA All-Star Game, Final Fours all the time, your conventions are incredible, and just tick down the whole list. So I think the way that we do it is we play offense and we share the good word. We share the gospel, so to speak, and not fall into that trap of feeling like we're some lesser than opponent to some bigger state.
We have reached the point. This evening is going to be, or is being recorded, and will be posted as a podcast episode. It's the Leaders and Legends podcast, which I host in conjunction with Wish TV. So if you want to hear any more of this or hear it again, please check wishtv.com and it'll have it on there. I end all of the podcasts with the same 5 questions to everyone. And I've had George Will answer them, and Mitch Daniels, and Dan Elsner, and Ken Britt, and the list goes on, Toby McClamrock, the list goes on. But I'm going to ask them of these young men and then check their answers against the first time they gave me their thoughts. So, all right, so you get to go first on all of them.
Of course.
You ready?
That way he can hear the questions and be ready. I know how this works.
What was your first job?
I was a stock boy at my dad's business, and he didn't pay me.
Mowing lawns, and they paid me. Or I would be on my 10-speed ringing that doorbell.
What was your first concert?
Chuck Berry.
Elton John.
If you could recommend any book for someone to read, Senator Donnelly, which book would you choose?
You know, the obvious one that people say is the Bible, but outside of that, it would be Lincoln and his generals.
T. Harry Williams.
Yeah, I'd say that any book on Lincoln.
Do you have a favorite?
Doors ain't good ones.
Team of Rivals.
And I mentioned that about the generals because he had to go through like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. And he could have quit at any time. And he just never stopped.
If you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, Senator Donnelly, which event would you choose?
You say we've answered these questions before?
Okay, so Governor Holcomb was on my podcast
He's buying me time.
pre-COVID. Yeah, remember? It was you and me and Henry.
It would probably be the Sermon on the Mount.
Sermon on the Mount?
Yeah, sure.
That would be mine too, although I did miss the Houston Astros, my favorite baseball team, win the World Series, whether you...
That was
agreed.
when they were cheating.
Yeah, whether you agree with it or not.
As a Yankees fan, that was when they were cheating with the signals.
If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, whom would you choose?
Pope Leo. He's from Chicago.
Did you meet him over there?
I did. But I didn't know him all that well because he worked like in a different division. But I'd love to spend time with him because he was actually born 2 weeks before me. And so we're very, very close, like age-wise, all of those things. He went to high school in Holland, Michigan, grew up in Chicago. And so it would be just fun to talk to him. Because how the heck do you grow up in the south side of Chicago and become Pope? Amazing.
Hard to compete with the Pope. I mean,
And I remember your answer from the first time I asked you.
it wasn't the manager of the Houston Astros.
No, I can tell you who it was. Your answer was Muffet McGraw.
Yeah, but I've met her.
You said conversation 2 hours off the record.
Oh, probably would be Muffet McGraw. She shoots straight, and I love her.
Do you know her?
Yes, very well. She shoots straight.
President Elsner, she coached basketball at that school up north. Marian. We Hoosiers have gotten so many gifts, so many wonderful aspects of the Lord's grace. One of them, even in a profession that has been excoriated from day one, and that will never stop, is politics and government and public service. And along with some of the names I mentioned before, whether it's Birch Bayh or Richard Lugar, Andy Jacobs, the list goes on. These two tremendous, incredibly fun Hoosiers are at the top of the list. Thank you to the Fortune family. Thank you to Dan Elsner and his family. Ambassador Donnelly, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Governor Holcomb. You know, you say you're not a loser until someone younger than you becomes governor. Eric Holcomb is 6 months younger than me. You did a fabulous job.
I'm just thinking, if this is, you said live streamed or recorded and played again, if it would help you with the Shelbyville Democrats for me to say something bad about you tonight, I mean,
No, that'll help with the Monroe County Democrats.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.